Hey everyone, it's Dale, and today we're going to talk a little bit more about quote style, and then I'm going to talk to you briefly about how to interview people and how to get the best quotes from people. So let's first start with quote style because you're working on story one as we speak, and quotes need to be styled properly. As I mentioned in class, there's only one way to style a direct quote, and you see it there on the screen. You'll notice open quote mark, the first complete sentence of a direct quote goes here, comma inside the quote mark, and then some attribution. We're trying to make it as easy as possible. Just learn this one way. Don't try to break up that first complete quote. Don't put the attribution at the beginning. It's that way. It's that simple. Just learn this one way and you'll be golden, I promise. So again, when you have a direct quote, you have the first complete sentence, comma inside the quote mark, and then some attribution. We'll talk about paraphrasing here in a little bit, but titles become really important here. Make sure you're reading that AP style book. Like I said in class, I tend to just put the title after the name. That's just the way I learned it. The only attribution word we use is said, so remember to keep that in mind when you're using quote style. And there is a variance in how you whether you put said before the name or after the name. We'll talk about that here in just a second. Again, here's another look at that one quote and how you should style a one-line quote. So the first complete sentence of a direct quote goes here, comma inside the quote mark, said Dale Blasingame, comma, a professor at Texas State University. Okay? So when your quote only has one sentence, you put the attribution after the first complete sentence. When your quote has two or more sentences, it appears like this. Still easy to remember because the first complete sentence is the first part of the quote. So same thing. For open quote mark, the first complete sentence of a direct quote goes here, comma inside the quote mark, attribution, period. Then you start a new quote mark, and then you put the rest of your sentences there and close the quote. Okay? So when you have two or more sentences, first complete sentence, then the attribution, then the rest of the sentences. Okay? Just learn that one way. I promise you it will save you a ton of headaches. I talked about that there's a difference between where you put the said and the name. So if you're using a quote from someone, it's the first time you've referenced them, you obviously have to include their first and last name, and you also have to include a title because we have no idea who this person is that you're quoting. So when that's the case, said goes before the name. And then in that case, you typically want the title going after the name. So you'll see there the first complete sentence of the direct quote goes here, said Dale Blasingame, comma, a professor at Texas State University. You could say said Texas State University Professor Dale Blasingame, but that's a long way to get to the name. You want the name and said to be close to each other. So that's why I recommend the title coming after the name in that situation. If you've already referenced that person in a story, then you only need the last name in your quote. So the bottom there is an example of when you would how you would do that, and in that case the name comes first and then said. So if you haven't referenced them and you're using first and last name and a title, said comes before the name. If you already have referenced them, name and then said. Simple enough. You'll get the hint, or you'll get the hang of it as we continue to move on with the semester, but I cannot stress how important this is. One last thing regarding quote style. Direct quotes are their own paragraphs. Do not include them with a previous paragraph. Direct quotes stand alone as their own paragraphs. So here's an example of what a story would look like as you're moving your way down. Dale Blasingame, a professor at Texas State University, spent Thursday discussing quote style. There's my quote. It's its own paragraph. Then I move on to the rest of the story, starting a new paragraph after the quote. Okay? That last line there is really important because quote style errors are a 25-point deduction on stories. We'll probably give you a pass on story one. We'll point it out, but from story two on, you need to know this. It's actually generous to give you the pass on story one since we've already discussed this in class multiple times. Learn quote style. It's simple. I promise you. There's one way to do it. Just learn that one way and you'll be good to go. Okay? So what is a paraphrase? A paraphrase is when you're taking information from someone that could potentially be a direct quote, but you don't really need a direct quote at that point in the story, or what they said is boring, or they may have had poor grammar when they said it, or it was too short. So what you do is you take that information, you attribute it to the person, but then you paraphrase it. You put it in your own words, staying as close to the original quote as possible, because you don't want to change what they say. But you can rephrase it a little bit if you need to. You do not use quote marks when you paraphrase. So here would be a paraphrase of something I said, according to Dale Blassingame, a professor at Texas State University. Direct quotes are the exact words spoken by a source. You can structure the sentence of a paraphrase in several ways. You don't have to start each one with according to. You could say direct quotes are the exact words spoken by a source, comma, Blassingame said. Or that would be, of course, if you've referenced me before. So don't think you have to structure your paraphrases exactly like this. We showed this example in class, but here's a good example of when to paraphrase and when to use a direct quote. If you interviewed someone and they said, "Firefighters got here at 5 p.m., that's boring. That adds nothing to your story. If you really need that time information, so let's say the call went out at 3:30 and firefighters didn't get there until 5. That's some relevant information. It took an hour and a half to respond to this fire, but that quote is boring, so you wouldn't want to use that. You'd want to paraphrase that information. However, if that person said firefighters got here just in time to save my baby, that's a good quote. So you want to use that quote. You want to find a place for it in your story. So that's it on quote style. Again, keep this lecture handy, keep those slides handy. Just learn that one way of doing quote style, and it'll make your life so much easier, I promise. I want to touch briefly on interview strategies, because this, for a lot of y'all, is probably the first time you've ever interviewed people. It's awkward. It's something that you become better at with experience and with time. So let's discuss a few strategies. You're going to be doing taped interviews for this class. That's obviously much easier than doing a live interview on the air. Some of you, especially if you've already done like an internship, which I don't know if anybody already has at this point, but you may have done a live interview on the air. Those are pretty nerve-wracking. So we have a much more relaxed atmosphere in this taped interview process that you'll be doing for this class. Once you do that taped interview, you'll then go back and listen to it again. You'll pick the quotes that make your story, exact quotes. You're not saying, well, that would sound better if I could just change this one word here. No, we can't do that, okay? You have to either paraphrase or use the exact quote they said. The good thing with taped interviews is if they didn't give you exactly a great answer, or the answer was kind of confusing, but you know that they were on the right track, find a new way to ask that question. Or pretend like, I didn't quite hear that. What did you say was the way you did it? And make them say it again. Give them another shot at answering that question. Don't just ask the same question again, but find a way to re-ask that question in a different way to potentially get a better answer. And again, the goal is always to get quality quotes. That's why you're talking to these people, is to get good quotes, good information, good quality quotes that you can use in your story. Here's what I do beforehand when I'm getting ready to do an interview. I talk to them a little bit beforehand, but not too much. I don't want to spill the beans on everything we're going to be talking about, because you might imagine what will happen if you do that. They're going to start answering the questions in their mind, and then they're going to start trying to memorize answers, and the quotes are going to be horrible. So I give them a general sense of what I'm going to talk about, but I don't give them the exact questions. You're going to get that a lot. Can you give me the questions that you're going to ask me? I always just reply with, hey, we're going to talk about the upcoming football season. I just want to get your idea of, what it's going to be like. I'm giving them a sense of what we're going to talk about, but I'm not saying question 1 is this, question 2 is this. You want to always ask open-ended questions. There are some times where you have to ask a yes or no question, but you need the follow-up immediately with that. And then those last 2, really important. Listen, and shut up. These are a lot harder than it sounds. 1, you're nervous. The person you're talking to is nervous, because this is probably one of your first interviews. It's always awkward to be interviewed for a story, so we've got nervousness on both sides. So you're trying to plan ahead and, okay, what question am I going to ask next? And a lot of times you just stop listening. So you have to get the point down to where you listen to the answer, and the answers that they're giving you are probably going to dictate what question you ask next. And the best way to do that is to shut up. You will have a lot of time, you'll have the tendency to go, oh yeah, or interrupt their answers. When you do that, they're going to stop talking, because now it seems like, oh wait, are we having a conversation or am I answering here? So nod your head if you need to let the person know that you're still paying attention and that they're on the right track, stuff like that. Maybe use hand expressions, stuff like that, but you do not want to be talking while the other person is giving an answer. Here's a quote from Sean Kelly at WCBB from the textbook. Do your best to put that person in a position where he or she feels at ease. This is a pretty good strategy, and you'll come across this sometimes where you talk to someone and they're just like the most talkative person in the world. Then you get them in front of an interview setting. My dog decided to start playing with her toy, so if you hear squeaking, that's what that is. If you get them to start doing the interview and they just completely freeze up. So what Sean Kelly recommends that's in your textbook is putting them back in their comfort zone. If you're interviewing a professor, maybe have them sit down at their desk or walk them through a classroom. Or if you're interviewing a football player, and it's possible to be out on the field or something and just walking around and talking, these will sometimes produce much better comments than just standing there straight, with a microphone in their face. A few other things that might lead to better quotes or better interviews. The author of our textbook has a strategy of treating the interview like a date. You don't rush in for the kiss right away the first time you meet, especially on a blind date. So you have to make chit-chat. You have to make them feel comfortable around you. You need to stop being so nervous. These are all things that apply to a date. They're also things that apply to an interview. So remember, the person you're talking to is likely just as nervous as you are. So helping both of y'all calm down, and we're talking about interviews here, I'm not giving dating advice. Helping both of y'all calm down is a good thing, although that does apply to dating as well. Again, do not forget to just stop and listen. Listening will provide great follow-up questions. Listening will let you know whether the person actually answered that question. Wait, did they just dodge that answer? Or did that answer make sense? Like, I really need that information, and that was kind of confusing. I might need to ask that again. All these things apply to listening. So make sure you're listening to the person who is talking. There are some of those things that I just discussed. And one of the biggest things is that fourth bullet point right there. You're going to get better answers when you're actually listening, because when you're distracted, the person you're talking to is going to start thinking like, man, is this person paying attention to me? Are they, what's going on here? Am I doing the wrong thing? So when you're looking down at your notes, or you're obviously off in Never Never Land trying to come up with the next question, the person you're talking to is going to be doing the same. So eye contact, nodding your head, yes or no, that helps with better answers, because the person is now tuned in with you and thinks that they're having a conversation, or they're having they're on the right track. And the good news is you'll soon begin to recognize quality quotes as soon as you hear them. As soon as person says something, you're going to think in your head, that was a good one. And that's a really good thing. Believe me, it'll make your storytelling and your writing so much better when you instantly recognize those quality quotes. And again, there's the dog with the toy. One final thing, perfect timing so I can go play with Lucy, but one final thing here, always the last question. Actually, let me backtrack. Two final things. First question you should ask is get their name and a title. Okay? So, hey, can you give me your first and last name? And, a lot of the cases, y'all are going to be interviewing students, so maybe get their major. Something that's relevant to the story. If you're doing a story on math scores and you're interviewing a math student, well, the fact that they're a math student is relevant. If you're doing a story on the basketball team, you wouldn't ask them what's your major and they're a sociology major if they're a basketball player. Okay, so the fact that they're a basketball player is relevant to the story. So that's the first thing. And the last thing you want to ask is always ask if there's anything else they want to add. Is there anything I missed? Is there anything I don't know about? Most of the time, 98% of the time, they're going to say, no, that's it. They just want to get on and move on with their day. But there will be that person that takes that opportunity. There is something. just the other day I was doing this and blah, 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 and it might completely take you down a whole nother road on your story. So first thing to ask, name and a title that's relevant. Last thing to ask, is there anything else they want to add? Give them a chance. You know, a lot of times it's not going to help you, but there will be opportunities that make up for it that will make it worth your while to ask that last question.